When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
So again, and the idea of slow is about honoring a child's interests and looking for where their passions show up and respecting the time it takes to really cultivate authentic skills. Sometimes we say we want children to do something really well or know something really well, and then we give them like 2 weeks to do it. And it's like, that's more like a 2-year process, but slowing down enough to realize that learning sometimes takes longer than we are giving it.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, supporting, and informing parents raising differently wired kids. As the parent of a neurodivergent child, you've probably had to let go of the traditional timelines we're often told our kids should follow, especially when it comes to school milestones, and that requires a big adjustment for us as parents. But what if we all took a step back and focused more on slowing down? That's exactly what my guest today, educator and author Leslie Martino, encourages us to do. With over 20 years of experience as a teacher, homeschooler, and adjunct lecturer, Leslie has a deep passion for helping parents and educators embrace a slower, more child-directed approach to learning. She homeschools her 4 children and also works as an educational consultant and parent coach. And her new book, The Joy of Slow: Restoring Wonder and Balance to Homeschool Learning, is a powerful guide to this philosophy. In this conversation, we dive into how slowing down in education leads to deeper understanding and makes space for joyful, spontaneous learning. Leslie shares how creating a learning environment that values curiosity and playfulness, not just during structured learning times, but throughout the day, can actually foster lifelong learners. We also talk about the importance of connection and relationships in both parenting and education, and how that connection is really at the heart of nurturing children who love to learn. Even if you're not homeschooling, I promise you're going to take away so much from this episode. And I have a request. If you like this episode after you've listened to it, send it to someone who you think would also get a lot out of it. You can just forward it in your podcast app or shoot it in an email and help me spread the word for this one. All right, here is my conversation with Leslie. Hey, Leslie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie.
Yes, I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. I really enjoyed your book, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes, but I always start my conversations by asking my guests to tell whatever they want to share about their personal story. But really what I'm most interested in is your why and how that's connected to the work that you do in the world and the lens through which you approach your work.
Okay. Well, I feel like to tell the whole story of my why starts in my childhood.
Bring it on.
Because I try to make those connections, as I'm growing and developing and I'm working with children, and some of the things I start noticing and remembering about myself when I was younger as well. But I've always loved working with children, and I've found myself doing that in some capacity, even when I myself probably could still be described as a child, teenager, loving younger children and working with children. But when I finally realized that I wanted to teach, which coming to that decision involved a lot of reflection about my childhood, about my brother, about my parents and education. I was very traditionally educated. My parents are from the Caribbean. They came to this country with a very strong sense of education is very important. They instilled that in us. But at the same time, my mother was the type of learner that really invited wonder and curiosity and imagination into learning. And some of my best learning experiences were not in that traditional setting. They were at home with my mom. My dad did work a lot. So I say my mom, she was home, she was present a lot. And of course, she was also working in the school. So our summers were just spent together. And those are my fondest memories. And when I decided that I wanted to teach, I started to work in these educational settings that were very varied at the beginning. So I saw a lot of different styles of education and things, but then I started to really place myself into environments that were doing things a little bit differently with children, I would say. And they were considered a little bit more non-traditional. And they were doing things like project-based learning and mixed age classrooms, and the schools themselves visually even looked different. And in my formative years as a teacher, that is where I spent the most time. And I think that had a lot of influence on me in the way that I see education, in the way that I see children. And I enjoy the opportunity to really connect with students in a very meaningful and deep way that I don't think other teachers in other settings have an opportunity to do, simply because the time isn't there or the work that you're doing doesn't allow for that type of connection. But in that connection, I was able to see children grow and develop and explore their interests. And I could see their strengths. And we were encouraged to talk really descriptively about children and look at them through a lens that was focused on their strengths, not their deficits. And that was very exciting for me. And it was exciting for two reasons, because I saw the children in those environments thriving, but I also knew that I was thriving. And I was able to slowly explore things and come to understand things in my own time, and being supported by my colleagues in that space. So it was like a model of education that was happening with the children, but it was happening for the adults as well. And so I knew from really early on that I wanted that for my children before I even had children. And when I think about my why, that is definitely part of it. Today, I am not in the classroom anymore. I am homeschooling my children and supporting parents and even other non-traditional schools, micro schools and things like that who are interested in different types of education. But that is definitely goes into my why. And that didn't necessarily make things super easy when I wanted to do this with my own children. Something I always share is that when I first started homeschooling my children, it made me have to really figure out if I really believed all the things I've always said I believed, because all of a sudden I was working with my own children and not everybody else's children. The stakes suddenly seem higher for you as a parent. And so that was something difficult that I had to go through. So all of that kind of goes into my why.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And on that last point, I feel that so strongly, especially having a child who has just launched in some way. But for so many years, I've had to just say, well, this is my child's journey. And I've had to really put my money where my mouth is in terms of what success looks like. And it's hard when the stakes feel high. As you said, our society is really giving you this feedback constantly to really be forced to dig deep and is this really what I believe? And to lean into that discomfort. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, not to mention, although I had experience working with children who are differently wired in the classroom, and also in light of some challenges that we were facing. And I say challenges, not because the children were challenging, but it was for me, I was learning how to see them, how to love them, how to mentor them and support them alongside of some of their learning differences. And that was challenging for me at first. As much experience as I had, I felt like, really, like you said, it was about putting your money where your mouth is. It was like the ultimate experience in making sure the things that I value line up with what I'm actually doing.
Yeah. And I also, before we get into your book, I just want to point out, you're not the first homeschool parent expert educator who's come on the show who was an educator in a more traditional setting beforehand. I had Maren Gores and Angela Sizer, who wrote a book on homeschooling on earlier this year, and they were both educators in the classroom. And I'm just wondering, what has that been like for you? Do you get any kind of side eyes from like educators who are in the classroom still for the choices that you've made with your own kids?
That's a good question. So when I talk to a lot of former educators who are now homeschooling, they talk a lot about some of the processes that they had to unlearn coming home, some of the things that were heavily emphasized in a school setting, and having to learn how to sort of shed some of those same expectations of the children and ideas and beliefs about education. But because my own journey in that setting was non-traditional, for me, it looked very different. And like I said, it was about figuring out whether or not I really did believe those things. And I don't tend to get a side eye from other educators. The work that I do to support people in education are, again, in those sort of non-traditional environments. But one of the things I always say is that the idea of slowing down in learning, slowing down in education, slowing down in our parenting, it doesn't exclude any type of learner. It doesn't exclude any type of philosophy in education. So I think there are things worth thinking about no matter what setting you're learning in, or no matter what setting you're teaching in. So because I approach it like that, it actually surprisingly tends to just simply open up a lot of conversation for people who are in those settings or not in those settings, but thinking about learning or thinking about life or education. And that's been a little bit surprising and a breath of fresh air, to be honest, in having conversations with people about the book.
I bet. Yeah. And as we were talking before I hit record, there's nothing in your book that doesn't feel like it would be easily and effectively and supportively applied to any family in any type of educational setting. So that's a great segue. I want to take a quick break now so that we don't have to do that as we get into the book. So when we come back from break, we'll dive into the joy of slow. Have you seen JLo's skin lately? She's been in the spotlight for 30 years, and it's like she doesn't age. Whatever her secret is, I want in. JLo believes beauty is ageless and doesn't have an expiration date. That's why she created a luxurious yet affordable skincare line designed for everyday use, with products that evolve with you at any age. The magic behind JLo Beauty is its simple 5-step routine for radiant, glowing skin. JLo's philosophy is that skincare should keep up with your busy life, so she created products packed with powerful ingredients in an easy morning and night regimen designed to transform your skin effortlessly. JLo's Beauty Deluxe Kit is the one and done solution, clinically proven to tighten and lift for instant, long-lasting results. It's a 5-piece set that cleanses, treats, moisturizes, and protects, leaving your skin smoother, brighter, and protected against UVA, UVB damage. I'm excited to try that Fresh Take Eye Cream since it visibly blurs and smooths fine lines and dark circles. That's exactly what I'm looking for. If you're ready for glowing skin, try JLo Beauty for 60 days. And if you're not satisfied, you can return the bottles, even if they're empty, and get your money back. Want that JLo glow? Head to jlobeauty.com/tiltparenting and get a special gift of 4 free masks for listeners of Tilt Parenting. Head to jlobeauty.com/tiltparenting for 4 free masks and free shipping today. jlobeauty.com/tiltparenting.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This is Kristen Bell.
And Adam Brody.
And we're dating.
In our new show, Nobody Wants This.
Right. We're not really dating.
No, in real life, we're married.
Right. Married to other people, not each other.
Oh, this is complicated.
Right. It's just like our love lives in Nobody Wants This, a show about what happens when a bold and sometimes provocative podcast host finds her unlikely match in a sweet traditional rabbi.
You can watch every episode of Nobody Wants This now, only on Netflix.
So your book is called The Joy of Slow, Restoring Balance and Wonder to Homeschool Learning. It's a sweet cover. I'm always drawn to cover design. So it was very inviting, even just to receive your book, and it made me want to dive in. And I found it to be a very compelling and thoughtful resource, again, for all families, whether you're traditionally educated, homeschooling, unschooling, whatever that is, as a way to get into the book. Will you tell us about the impetus for it? What made you realize I have to get this out into the world? And as part of that, tell us what it's all about.
Sure. I really felt like it was important to get this out there for a few reasons. One, all of the ideas in the book are things that I have been passionately talking about and sharing about for a long time. And I felt like sometimes I would find myself frustrated because I felt like I could only give like a small piece of the equation here and a small piece of the equation here. And then it just dawned on me that I really need to write a book to sort of like package this the way it all sits inside of my brain, because there are different elements and different pieces that I think of and that I consider when it comes to slowing down in education or restoring balance and wonder to learning or joy in our parenting. But I didn't want people to walk away from this book thinking, well, I have to implement every single thing in there in order to experience this joy, or I have to do everything to slow down. It's not what I'm saying at all. And I felt like I needed somewhere to really like amplify that message that no, this is about figuring out the things that you value as a family, leaning into those things and slowing down enough to be thoughtful and intentional about the way that you mentor your children through this journey of life, and holding on to the pieces that really resonate with you, forgetting the rest, but really just giving it all somewhere to sit and live so that people could reflect and read it slowly and do the work to allow themselves to figure out where they sit inside of this idea. And so that's why I really wanted to get this book out there. And so when I think about the idea of slow, some of the elements that I talk about in the book that are part of it are about when it comes to learning and when it comes to education, it's that idea of letting learning unfold a little bit more slowly than we're used to, letting it unfold a little bit more naturally, because there's value in understanding things deeply, knowing things well over just sort of shallow perusal of all of this information that we are bombarded with in this day and age. So when you're responsible for curating a learning environment, whether that's in this classroom or whether that's at home, just focusing on doing fewer things better. That could be in really big ways, and that could be in small ways too. Like I have a child who really enjoys cooking, and he really wants to be a chef, is what he says. And he was asking, how do I learn to make all of these things, and how do I learn to do this? And even just taking that idea, okay, well, let's focus on doing just a few things really, really well. And then over time, you can expand your repertoire, but that idea can be so small and it can be so big at the same time. So again, in the idea of slow is about honoring a child's interests and looking for where their passions show up and respecting the time it takes to really cultivate authentic skills. Sometimes we say we want children to do something really well or know something really well, and then we give them like 2 weeks to do it. And it's like, that's more like a 2-year process, but slowing down enough to realize that learning sometimes takes longer than we are giving it. We have this pervasive messaging that says that all of this learning has to occur from the ages of 0 to 18 and then done, or, at least what we're responsible for anyway. And I pause because I don't often remember my age. I'm a 47-year-old adult who is still learning things and who is still growing and processing some of the same information I was processing as a 12-year-old. So I just think that's not fair to children to tell them those kinds of things. Doing work that's meaningful. And inside of that, doing work that's meaningful is just taking the time to marvel and be amazed at something. We study some really amazing things, even in school, but we don't have enough time to like react to the things that we're learning, naturally respond, or to make connections. Those kinds of things take time. And it requires tackling subjects with a bit of dynamism and flexibility. Like things can't always be placed inside of a pretty little box. Even when you're using curriculum, it can't. And so part of that slow learning is also just being willing to be patient as a parent, patient with your own unfolding understanding of your children, patient with your children's own unfolding understanding of themselves. We are all growing, we are all learning, and I think it's supposed to feel messy and imperfect. And slowing down and sort of muddling around in the muck of it makes you realize that we're not after perfection. We're just, the process is more important than anything else. And so is connection and developing relationships and finding joy in those things. I always think about that word enjoy, literally means to be in joy. And so living inside of that imperfect place, like joy encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses pain. It encompasses challenge. It encompasses fun. It encompasses joyful is when we are living a life that's aligned with the things that we intrinsically value. And the joy comes from that, but it doesn't mean that things are perfect. So I just find that there's so many opportunities to live a joyful life with the family and connection and love and partnership. So slow encompasses all of those things.
I love it. I feel like this is a little therapy session for me as we're having this conversation. So thank you. Like, there's so many things that you've just said that so deeply resonate with me, and I know will resonate with the audience. And like, I wrote down some of the words that you just said, which I love so much. Well, first of all, joy. I mean, what an incredible word. And it's one that we don't often, again, associate with education or learning or parenting. Messy, marvel, imperfect, connection, meaningful. So these are all such incredible words. And it's such a reminder about, to me, as you were saying those words and describing this process, how learning is those things, but learning is not necessarily what's happening in most traditional settings. What is actually happening in traditional settings? Because it feels very disconnected from what you just described.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that in traditional settings, often the things that actually build in wonder and build in imagination and build in surprise and all of those wonderful, good, feel good kinds of words and curiosity, the things happening often in those traditional settings, unfortunately, there's not that space for those things to live, for those things to exist, for those things to be cultivated. One of the things that I think we have to do when we say that we want to invite those things is that we have to rethink how we conventionally conceive of things like progress and things like success and time, or even what a subject scope and sequence looks like. You know, sometimes we want to do things just lockstep and make things very linear. And I get it. There's a lot of people to answer to, right? In education, you send your child to school, you send your child to this place, and the place has to ensure that they're doing something with their time, right? Like they have to answer to the children, they have to answer to the parents, they have to answer to the powers that be. And so they think the best way to do that is just let's do things really linearly and let's check boxes and show these boxes are checked so your child has learned. And you can almost see how that has happened, right? But then unfortunately, we also say that we want to develop a lifelong learner, or we want to develop a child with critical thinking skills, or we say all of these things that don't match what it is we're actually doing. Because I think that one of the ways that you recapture that delight and depth that are really hallmarks of meaningful learning is that you have to make space for a child's interests. And so what does that mean in an education setting? You know, well, to be blunt, I think it means making space for a child's interests and calling that school, not the extracurricular activity, you know? So that's a pretty bold thing to make space for and time for. And you're like, a lot of people, you say that and they're like, well, how are you going to do everything else? And sometimes I think that for parents who do have their kids in those traditional school settings, it's about making space for those things at home, if that's not happening at school. Do you know what I mean? But I think that we need to include elements like challenge and choice and risk and adventure, and holding a sense of playfulness about those experiences, because learning is inherently fun, especially when we flexibly seek to experiment with the ways that we can captivate learners, you know, whether it's ourselves or whether it's our children. It includes hard work. It includes success. It includes failure. It includes play. and relaxed alertness and deep work and deep thinking. It includes all of it. But I think that to say that it includes that, then we can't use it as punishment. So if a child is failing, or if a child is struggling, or if a child is being challenged, in traditional settings, we look at that and we say, well, they're failing. I'm like, no, that's just the feedback we need to keep going and adapt and move on. It's all part of it. So that's why I say we have to rethink how we can conventionally conceive of things like progress. And nurturing wonder and imagination is also embracing other elements like surprise and flexibility. And when I say surprise, when you build in surprise and wonder into learning, I know I quoted in my book, but I always think it's Bored and Brilliant, or Reclaiming Wonder, maybe was the name of the book. When you want to be surprised, it's a matter of honing your attention and being primed for whatever comes next. It's like you have to be willing to be surprised, right? So how do we encourage our children to do that? To hone their attention. That's not something that can happen quickly. If you are going to hone your attention around something, that means you're going to plan for pauses in the things that you're learning. It means that you're going to, try to make connections, go out into your community, see things. You're going to read widely. You're going to relish stories. You're going to have real conversations with kids, not like the kinds of fake conversations where you're like drilling them and firing off questions to them and wanting them to give you the right answer. A real conversation where there's honest exchange, where you're not the know-it-all, where you're learning from the child, where the child can say what they think and feel without fear of judgment, like a real conversation. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like building in surprises, all of those things. And that is I think is like a total rethinking of what education is. And also, I think it's about nurturing flexible thinking. That word always comes to mind when I think about the greatest openness that there is for learning. And that flexibility in your thinking, you're applying new ideas, you are intellectually curious. So you're slowing down and you're making time for curiosity. And I always think I think I gave an example in the book of this too, when a science teacher, right? They do this like really well. They do this experiment. You picture them in front of a group of kids and they have this experiment that they do. And the kids are like, oh, wow. And they start asking questions like, well, how did that happen and why? But that image of inviting a curious response, not being so quick to answer all of our children's questions, living in that middle ground of not knowing. That's uncomfortable, like even you're not knowing. A lot of times children ask a question, adults want to answer. But what you do with what you don't know is exciting. And that's that middle place, that mucky place is the fun place to live in. It's where real learning really exists. So I probably am talking too much. I don't know. I just realized how much I'm talking.
You really like this work, I can tell. You're so lit up right now. I know, I love it. I've taken so many notes and I could take this conversation in like 20 different directions. Let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we'll get into some more of it.
Oh, such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com's primetime kickoff event. Save up to 50% off select styles, plus doorbusters. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Max Bankman, I'm the new doctor.
Welcome aboard the Odyssey.
ABC Thursdays.
This ship is heaven. We're tending to our passengers' dreams. I'm in.
From 911 executive producer Ryan Murphy comes a splashy new drama on a luxury cruise ship with Joshua Jackson and Don Johnson.
It's your job to keep everyone alive.
She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're going to be okay.
Dr. Odyssey. Thursdays, 9/8 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Making everyone happy on vacation isn't easy, but you know what is? Going to Aruba. All you have to do is walk out your door to find pristine pools, relaxing white sand beaches, and an island teeming with outdoor activities that'll put a smile on any face. You won't just feel great, you'll all feel great, filled with a calmer, more peaceful vibe that radiates Aruba's warmth. And the best part is, it never fades. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your family trip at Aruba.com.
So really, there are so many different things that I'll just tell you a little inside behind the scenes of my podcasting processes. When I do this, I scribble all these notes and I have to write these symbols for myself so I can train my brain and eyes where to go next. And I don't even have a system. So it's really messy. But what I want to say is that first of all, this nonlinear approach, this interest-based, this strength-based, all of these things are what we talk about all the time here at Tilt, because it is the way that really works for neurodivergent learners who are definitely asynchronous and can dive deep into areas of interest. They often need a lot of time to explore. Curiosity is such a hallmark of the way that they might navigate learning anything. And so that's why I appreciate that you said whatever kind of educational environment your child is in, these are things that we can do as parents of neurodivergent kids and to really support them in discovering their interests and getting curious and kind of using those or leveraging those interests to find out all kinds of things about who they are and what they care about and all that stuff. So I love all of that. I actually want to go into slow a little bit more. I mean, your book is called The Joy of Slow. And again, I love the word slow. And shout out to my friend, Simone Davies, who's is the author of The Montessori Child, The Montessori Baby, and The Montessori Toddler. But she's all about slow and how do we really make space and room for our kids to lean into wonder and to navigate the world kind of on their own terms. So say more about what you mean by slow, and maybe as part of that, share a couple of ways that we could even today, after listening to this episode, incorporate some slow into the way that we show up for our kids.
Let me go back to interests again, because it's something that comes up in my mind a lot when I think about slowing down. Giving kids the space and the time to explore their interests is something that's not just when they're older and you know that they definitely have an interest. For me, that's something that starts from the time that children are very, very young. There's an educator who used this term, following after. And it's just as the adult in that situation, following after your child and looking at the things that they're drawn to, their strong interests and preferences, which tend to actually abide for a really long time once children really discover what those things are. So when they're younger, it's about having time in the day where it's not rushing to activities maybe, but just being home and saying, is my child interested in playing pretend? I'm talking about really young children here. Are they interested in reading books? Are they interested in helping me in the kitchen? Are they interested in drawing and painting or playing with different materials like Play-Doh or clay or sand or just about anything, empty cardboard boxes? Just children love to just explore. And to slow down is to create the context for all of that to occur. So as a parent, it's about setting up your own life so that you have the time to do those things and space to just breathe. I think that we often, especially when children are younger, we try to just fill the space and create some sort of a schedule for ourselves, because parenting in those early years can be very difficult and it can be challenging, and we just need something to do with the kids every day. But inside of that, I think there has to be, like, I call it like margin, lots of space cushioned into all of those things to feel internally slow. I equate that with peace and safety, but I also feel like it's time to not be rushed, to have your child making a mud pie and to not have to say, all right, clean it up because I have to go to the grocery store. Just uninterrupted time to do what you would like to do. So that's an example of a young child. And as children get older, they start to develop varied interests. And also, it's still important, even for a teenager on the other end, to make time and space for that kind of thing. My daughter is an artist and she spends hours and hours. I mean, I think sometimes more time than people would think, just dedicated to this passion. And there has to be some time when it's okay for her to do that. When I'm not saying, okay, hurry up because I need to get to X, Y, and Z with you. And so I think that idea of slow has to incorporate time for interest. And it's easy to say that with your mouth without really looking at whether or not your time that you're spending at home says the same thing. And then I think when it comes to learning even other traditional subjects, it's a willingness to not, I say this in the book, but not cover the subjects, but uncover them slowly. So when you cover something, you feel responsible for just including it. We're supposed to do this, so let's do it. Let's study it. But when you uncover something, you can uncover it quickly and be surprised, or you can cover it slowly. You can peek under, you can uncover it and turn it upside down and inside out. And so when I think about a field of study, when you're uncovering it, you are wanting to go beyond surface level understanding. You are taking an academic area or taking an event and saying, well, okay, how would a geographer want to explore this topic? How would an artist look at this topic, or a filmmaker look at this topic? Because you're trying to pull it apart in different ways in your mind. We're studying this art, but how do professionals in this particular art field, what do they think it's important to even explore this area of art? It's asking questions. And maybe that's also a good thing to equate it with. Slowing down is just a willingness to I get visual images. So I have this visual image of a piece of Play-Doh. It's stretching it out. What are all the things inside of it when you stretch it out? You have to ask yourself a lot of questions to get there. And I like doing that. I like slowing down long enough to ask a lot of questions, because it's in the asking of the questions that you get closer to an understanding. And sometimes it invites more questions, and sometimes it invites more ambiguity. It's that turning it around and upside down and inside out and slowing down enough to do that.
Yeah. As you were answering that and talking about this asking of questions, it made me think of Julie Bogart's work in Raising Critical Thinkers. And I know that you refer to Julie in here as well. And there's so much alignment there. And I just want to mention that, because if you're listening to this episode and this is really sparking you, go to the show notes page and make sure that you go back and listen to the episode I did with Julie as well, which was another one of my favorite conversations. This is becoming one of my favorite conversations I've had recently. So thank you for that. We're running a little long, but I wanted to ask you about the chapter in your book. It's called Learning in a Different Tempo. It was so in alignment with what I know serves and supports neurodivergent students. And you talk about embracing surprise, flexibility, and spontaneity. So could you talk a little bit about how those elements benefit our kids? And then how do we create the room for spontaneity in our very busy lives?
I'd love to start there actually with that, because spontaneity is one of those things that when people think about it, they think that it automatically, I'm sure there's thoughts that come up when you think spontaneity. Oh my goodness, how am I supposed to be more spontaneous? I have so many things to do, And I think that part of spontaneity is important. But one of the things that I've learned about spontaneity is that you still have to make space for it. You still have to create room in your life for it. If you're looking for this element of spontaneity, you have to be open to it, right? So that means that when that moment comes up, should I spontaneously do this or should I do this? It's no, okay, I'm creating room to allow this. So it's, because if you're not open to it, you'll often just continue to shut it down. But what I wanted to say about spontaneity also was that one of the things that's interesting about spontaneity, when I was looking through the dictionary and searching for a definition of it, one of the definitions I found was proceeding from natural feeling or native tendency. And that really struck me, because one of the things I immediately asked myself is, what would a natural response be in an educational environment and just parenting if you were uninhibited by worry, pressure, or other constraints? And I know for me, I say this in the book, but I would be more engaged and in the moment. I would be interested in doing things quickly or slow or quick, whatever the work warranted for, I would just be more present and engaged in the experience. And so when I think about inviting that level of spontaneity into your life, it's also about saying, how can I create room to just have a more natural response to things? I think we don't even realize that the responses that we have to things are even rushed. I like to think about it like, I believe I do tell this story in the book as well, that one of my younger twins, we were reading a book, we were reading a story, and we were very moved by this particular story. And at the end of it, everybody was just silent. The book ended and everybody was silent. And he said, did you notice how when you enjoy something like that or something moves you, you just have to take like this long breath? And I was like, yes, yes, I do understand. That's a very natural response. You go through something difficult, you go through something challenging, something moved you, something's really exciting. You pause for a moment. You want to do that. So sometimes I think spontaneity is also just allowing room for those kinds of things. And that can happen in different ways, in different kinds of contexts. It could be as simple as not rushing through dinner. It could be as simple as watching a movie together and then just lingering and reacting to it for a moment, and sometimes for my family, that means we're arguing about our opinions about something or just enjoying that moment of being together. And it's a natural response, or before we rush to the next thing. And in a learning environment, that's the same. How do we naturally just linger with material that we've interacted? I like journaling. And so sometimes I invite that as a process into some of the things that we do. Journal about it or just think before responding. There's a book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, that I absolutely love. And it talks about the kinds of creative responses that we have to all kinds of life situations that we have learned and practiced through drawing, because drawing causes you to see things differently. And so sometimes I also relate that to spontaneity and the natural responses that we have to things. Sometimes we need to allow ourselves more creative responses or a chance to look at something, look at a problem upside down, or to see the white spaces in between the definite objects. I know that I'm talking so metaphorically in a way, but you can take that and use that concretely in things that you're learning or things that you're doing or a problem that you're trying to figure out. What are the things that I haven't seen here? What are the things that I haven't considered? What are the things that I'm missing? What do you see that maybe I don't see? How does someone else see this that's not the same as how I see it? There's a lot of ways to invite that sort of gray area, white space area into things that you're looking at. And I think it's allowing time, slowing down and allowing time for that kind of natural response that I think is part of spontaneity. Not always just like spontaneously deciding to do something or go somewhere, or that's part of it too, but that is definitely part of it. So that chapter I do give lots of examples of ways to invite surprise and flexibility and curiosity and wonder and imagination and flexibility, spontaneity into learning. So I do hope that people definitely go and read that book. But I hope that sparks other ways for people to imagine for themselves their own ways that they could do those things and invite those things, because it's not, that chapter specifically wasn't just a prescriptive unfolding of how those elements can be woven into learning. It's hopefully sparks your thinking about ways that, okay, how can I do this in my own life? Or how can I do this in my own learning experiences?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I loved that story that you just shared with us about your son making that observation after finishing the book. I got chills when I read it in the book, and kids are so wise, so lovely that they remind us about the things that really matter. But I love this word, linger. That is such a powerful word when thinking about this. The word that came up for me when considering the way you describe spontaneity is also just being nimble, like being nimble to go with what's happening and just making the space for that, slowing down. And as we're talking about this too, so much of what we explore in Tilt Parenting is how do we kind of fortify ourselves so that we're resourced enough so we have the capacity to take that pause, whether it's dealing with a challenging situation or being present enough to linger and to take that deep breath together after finishing a book or getting to a lively, debate after watching something together. So I just so appreciate so much of what we've talked about today and this kind of framework and way. It's really a way of life. Again, your book, The Joy of Slow, Restoring Balance and Wonder to Homeschool Learning, it's really so much bigger than homeschool learning. It's really a way of navigating life as a family.
And you saying all that made me think of something else I wanted to share. There's an element for parents, for us as parents. I think we need to lean into the element of playfulness a little bit more in our parenting. And I think because we love our children, because we want to get things right, because there's no rule book out there that's just telling us how to do it all, and we find that we're constantly figuring things out. Unfortunately, we lean into things like control to get a handle on things when it doesn't really achieve the results that we're looking for. But when I say playfulness, I think we have to allow that element of playfulness in how we are figuring things out to also be okay. We don't have all the answers. We're not perfect people. We are, very much walking out this imperfect process with our children. But part of the idea of play, and I do actually talk about this in one chapter, part of the idea of play for adults is doing things that have a little bit of challenge built in, and being able to meet those challenges and explore those challenges. But playfulness is something that we really do need to capture, because we often work really hard and the things that we're working at start to feel a little bit more like drudgery instead of something that's life-giving or something joy-filled. And I think that we think that our idea of like that playfulness, like, let me try this, let's see if this works, or that seems really risky because it seems like that's time wasted, or it seems like that somehow someone will suffer in that process. But I think that's exactly what we need to be able to play with our set of circumstances and to figure things out. Like, if we look at that process as, no, it's a joy. It's a joy. Like, we get to figure this out together, and to hold that with an element of playfulness. I know that serves me greatly as a parent.
So good. What a great note to end this on, because honestly, I feel like we could talk for hours, but I'm going to respect both of our time and we'll wrap this up. But before we go, can you share with listeners where you would like them to engage with you, how they can learn more about your work and social media, whatever that is?
Sure. Definitely check out my website. You can find me at lesliemartino.com. When it comes to social media, I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is Leslie M. Martino. And I'd love if you checked out the book, The Joy of Slow, Restoring Balance and Wonder to Homeschool Learning. Email me, join my email list, come find me. I'd love to chat.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And yeah, listeners, I really do recommend checking out Leslie's book. Again, I found it so supportive. This conversation is just a little flavor of what you'll get when you read the book. So I'll have a link to that and all the other things that came up in this conversation, as well as where to connect with Leslie in the show notes page. So thank you. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the book. And thank you for everything you shared with us today.
Thank you so much, Debbie. This conversation was really nice. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign, where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at Tilt Parenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.